Chapter 3, Mr. Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle.
Sherlock Holmes was seated at the breakfast table. I picked up the walking stick which our visitor had left behind him the night before. It was a fine, thick piece of wood with a round, bulging head. Just under the head was a broad, silver band, nearly an inch across. To James Mortimer, MRCS, from his friends of the CCH, was carved upon it, with the date 1884. It was just such a stick as the old-fashioned family practitioner used to carry, dignified, solid, and reassuring. "Well, Watson, what do you make of it?" Holmes was sitting with his back to me, and I had given him no sign of my occupation. "How did you know what I was doing? I believe you have eyes in the back of your head." "I have, at least, a well-polished, silver-plated coffee pot in front of me," said he. "But tell me, Watson, what do you make of our visitor's stick? Let me hear you reconstruct the man by an examination of it." "I think," said I, following as far as I could the methods of my companion, "that Dr. Mortimer is a successful elderly medical man, well esteemed, since those who know him give him this mark of their appreciation." "Good," said Holmes. "Excellent. I think also that he is probably a country practitioner who does a great deal of his visiting on foot." "Why so?" "Because this stick has been so knocked about that I can hardly imagine a town practitioner carrying it. The thick iron ferrule is worn down, so it is evident that he has done a great amount of walking with it." "Perfectly sound," said Holmes. "And then again there is the Friends of the CCH. I should guess that to be the local hunt to whose members he has possibly given some surgical assistance, and which has made him a small presentation in return." "Really, Watson, you excel yourself," said Holmes, pushing back his chair. He had never said as much before, and his words gave me intense pleasure. He now took the stick from my hands and examined it for a few minutes. Then, with an expression of interest, he carried the cane to the window and looked over it again with a convex lens. "Interesting, though elementary," said he as he returned to his favorite corner of the settee. "There are certainly one or two indications upon the stick. It gives us the basis for several deductions." "Has anything escaped me?" I asked with some self-importance. "I trust that there is nothing of consequence which I have overlooked." "I'm afraid, my dear Watson, that most of your conclusions were erroneous. Not that you were entirely wrong. The man is certainly a country practitioner and he walks a good deal." "Then I was right, to that extent. But that was all." No, my dear Watson, not all. By no means all. I would suggest, for example, that a presentation to a doctor is more likely to come from a hospital than from a hunt, and that when the initials CC are placed before that hospital, the words Charing Cross very naturally suggest themselves. Well then, supposing that CCH does stand for Charing Cross Hospital, what further inferences may we draw? Do none suggest themselves? You know my methods. Apply them. I can only think of the obvious conclusion that the man has practiced in town before going to the country. I think we might venture a little farther than this. Look at it in this light. On what occasion would his friends unite to give him a pledge of their goodwill? Isn't it most probable that such a presentation would be made at the moment when Dr. Mortimer withdrew from the service of the hospital in order to start in practice for himself? It certainly seems probable. Now you will observe that he could not have been on the staff of the hospital, since only a man well established in a London practice could hold such a position, and such a one would not drift into the country. What was he then? If he was in the hospital and yet not on the staff, he could only have been a house surgeon or a house physician, little more than a senior student, and he left 5 years ago. The date is on the stick. So your grave, middle-aged family practitioner vanishes into thin air, my dear Watson. There emerges a young fellow under 30, friendly, unambitious, absent-minded, and the professor of a favorite dog, which I should describe roughly as being larger than a terrier and smaller than a mastiff. I laughed incredulously as Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his settee and looked up to the ceiling. "As to the latter part, I have no means of checking you," said I. "But at least it is not difficult to find out a few particulars about the man's age and professional career. From my small medical shelf, I took down the medical directory and turned up the name. There were several Mortimers, but only one who could be our visitor. I read his record aloud. Mortimer James, MRCS 1882, Dartmoor, Devon. House surgeon from 1882 to 1884. At Charing Cross Hospital, winner of the Jackson Prize for Comparative Pathology. Medical officer for the parishes of Grimpen, Thorsley and High Barrow. A country doctor, as you very astutely observed," said Holmes. "I think that I am fairly justified in my inferences. As to the adjectives," I said, "if I remember right, friendly and ambitious and absent-minded. It is my experience that it is only a friendly man in this world who receives testimonials, only an unambitious one who abandons a London career for the country, and only an absent-minded one who leaves his stick and not his visiting card after waiting an hour in your room. And the dog has been in the habit of carrying this stick behind his master. Being a heavy stick, the dog has held it tightly by the middle, and the marks of his teeth are very plainly visible. The dog's jaw, as shown in the space between these marks, is too broad in my opinion for a terrier, and not broad enough for a mastiff. It may have been, yes, by Jove, it is a curly-haired spaniel." He had risen and paced the room as he spoke. Now he halted in front of the window. There was such a ring of certainty in his voice that I glanced up in surprise. "My dear fellow, how can you possibly be sure of that?" "For the very simple reason that I see the dog himself on our very doorstep, and there is the ring of its owner." Adapted from The Hound of Baskervilles. A clear mind and an observant eye helps us avoid hasty, ill-informed conclusions.